Welcome to today's National Soil Survey Center webinar. My name is Sean McVeigh, National Training Coordinator for the Soil Science Division, and host for today's webinar, State Soil Scientists in the Soil Science Division Moving Forward Together. This webinar is being recorded, and all participants join the webinar in listen-only mode. You receive the webinar audio through your device's speakers. There is no telephone dial-in. If you are having audio difficulties, please check the various ways your computer speakers may be muted or have their volume set low, including the speaker adjustments available in the Adobe Connect interface. You can maximize your webinar experience in Adobe Connect by shutting down VPN and any other programs that might compete for bandwidth. This includes email and Microsoft Outlook and instant messaging and Skype. Taking a look at our webinar room layout, Adobe Connect has content pods that include the feature presentation, chat, and Q&A pods. Use the 4-arrow icon in the featured presentation pod to enter and exit the full screen view as you choose. To submit a comment or question for me or our presenters, use the Q&A pod and type in your questions. We'll handle technical difficulties the best we can while hosting the webinar and interact with our presenter to answer your questions during verbal Q&A periods. I want to thank Michael Robotham for being here to support our webinar and introduce our presenters for this part of our webinar series. Mike, I'm going to turn the webinar over to you so you can introduce the second part of our three-part webinar and our presenters.
Thank you, Sean. This is Michael Robotham. I see a lot of familiar names on the attendees list, and it's great to see you all back again this week for the second in our three-part webinar series on state soil scientists and SSD working together. This webinar features the Dave and Dave show. So we'll be talking about two slightly different but related topics. First up will be David Lindbo. Dave is the director of the Soil Science Division, as I would hope all of you know, or certainly most of you know. He'll be talking about the Soil Science Division focus teams, and we'll have a chance for questions after that because Dave does need to leave early today. That question and answer period will be followed by Dave Hoover, the director of the National Soil Survey Center, who will talk about opportunities for working together and how we can make that work so that we keep track of things, we understand who's doing what, and everybody gets credit for the great work that they do. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dave Lindbo to talk about the focus teams. Dave, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Mike. So as Mike said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the focus teams. Hopefully this is not a new subject to the majority of you. For those who have been at the National Cooperative Soil Survey Conference out in Boise, you got an overview of what they were. Also, they've been put in the weekly update that Pam Thomas has put together. But I wanted to take time and just kind of talk to you about it for those who haven't seen it, answer any questions that still may be lingering. So why do we have focus teams? One of the first questions folks have asked, and again, multiple reasons. One, our workforce is changing. I think all of you recognize this, that the FTEs are decreasing. We've been told from up on high that we will be reducing our FTEs over the next few years. So that's going to happen. And as that happens, we're going to have a slow loss of expertise through this attrition. So when we don't do the best job at succession planning, we don't always have the folks that know everything talking to everybody. So this is one way to get people to talk and kind of get some of that knowledge that is out there, that tacit knowledge, to more than just one or two people. Also, there are emerging needs. We've seen coastal zone mapping is becoming more important. Some of the stories recently have definitely illustrated that. We need to know more about those areas. Urban. If you look at the demographics of the United States, most of our people live in urban areas. And cynically, some might say that's where most of our voters are. So it's important that we do provide information for them. And the interest in urban agriculture is growing, so we have an opportunity. Soil biology is another area. Historically, the Soil Survey has not done a really good job at collecting data on soil biology, but with soil health on the rise and the interest in soil health, we definitely need to know more about our soil biology and our dynamic soil properties. One of the things that I think has been an emerging area for a long time, so maybe it's not emerging, is outreach. We know we're the most important section of USDA, NRCS, and not everybody does. So we need to do a better job at telling people what a great job we do. So that's another area we can do better in. And then leadership development kind of goes along with the change in the workforce. We don't do succession planning as well as we could, with really focusing on leadership development, identifying potential leaders way early when they're GS5s, and getting them prepared to be leaders is something that we really need to do. We also have a diversity of expertise. Geographically, we are all over the country. It sometimes makes it difficult to know what somebody on the West Coast is doing if you're on the East Coast. Organizationally, we've got folks in different silos, different areas that sometimes don't talk to each other. And cooperators, again, we can do better at dealing with and incorporating and working with the National Cooperative Soil Survey to bring in more expertise. Finally, silo busting. The idea behind the focus teams is that they're outside of the traditional chain of command. They have a focus, they have a job to do, they are to do it, they're empowered to do that, and to work sometimes outside of the chain of command. Chain of command is good for some things, but it can also be a limitation. Also with the focus teams, with their websites, the fact that they are trying to get input, I hope to increase transparency and improve the overall communication. I think we could always do a better job at communicating. So another question that comes up is why a team and not a committee? And I've thought about this quite a bit, and it has to do with a slight philosophy difference between what a team is and what a committee does. So a team is results-driven, timely, changeable, in this case field-based and bottom-up. Yes, they were created by us in SSD at the leadership level, but the team is composed of folks that are at the field level. Whereas committees, in my role now, I sit on a lot of committees. Prior to coming to NRCS, I also sat on a lot of committees, and they're good. They are process-driven. They usually have a idea of what they are supposed to do process-wise. They're supposed to talk about rules, etc. But sometimes they forget that they have to come up with results. They are timeless. Committees never die. Whereas teams, when they've finished what they need to do, they can be disbanded. Committees tend to be rigid in terms of who's on the committee, whereas teams can be flexible, bring in people as needed, as the results dictate. Committees also tend to be management-based. Folks from up on high, it's a top-down structure, create a committee. One rather cynical person I know said, committees are what you create when you want to stop progress. Teams are what you create when you make progress. And I hope here that we're going to make progress. So, the teams. Currently, these are the teams that are out there. There are 13 of them. I am not going to go into the details on what each team is doing. There's a website at the end of this presentation that you can go to that will give you more details on the teams. But again, they cross from field-based to more the leadership-based to outreach, work with the cooperative soil survey, so that they are wide-reaching. But the only way that they are really going to work well is by talking to each other, and they have been doing that. They have been meeting at least on monthly basis. So so far it has been interesting watching how these teams have grown. They've really only been in place since. So we are learning as we go. We will, I'm sure, make mistakes, and we will grow from them. If we don't make mistakes, I will be very surprised. We learn from those. So this is also part of our overall 10-year plan, Soils 2026, is to have these teams in place so that we can bring in as much expertise, focus on particular issues, and then disseminate that information to the rest of the soil science community. That's not just within NRCS, that is the entire soil science community, other agencies, cooperators, private sector, etc. There is a steering team, that's the 14th team, that has a mixture of folks from the division as well as from state soil scientists, cooperators, all a mix in there. And the idea behind the focus of the steering team is to provide that leadership and guidance, keep everybody moving forward, give a national perspective to regions and teams so that, again, we don't lose sight of what we're doing. And it's to make sure that we are indeed communicating amongst ourselves. In general, the general team charge is to act as liaisons, provide leadership, the repository of information, and to me the third bullet is really important, because if we don't do this, we have the risk of, as people retire, losing expertise and losing that information. So by having a number of people involved, hopefully we can maintain and retain a lot of the great knowledge that you all have. Again, coordinate to ensure the continuity of activities, and make sure that things are done consistently across a wide range. Provide training. Some of the areas, like in the coastal zone team, there are new techniques that need to be talked about. Training in terms of different ideas on safety or different safety issues that we haven't thought about, such as wearing a life jacket, making sure you have hard hats on when you're working with a boom, and steel-toed shoes, which you all should be having anyhow. Supplement some of the activities for the Board of Advisors and the management teams, and again, give that overall national perspective. Finally, each team is to develop and maintain a website. Again, I'll give you the focus team website at the end of this presentation. So how does it work? You can see at the bottom here, we've got the focus team website, so please visit it. But a couple questions that have come up is, volunteer. If you want to be on one of these teams, volunteer if interested. You do not have to contact me. You do not have to contact the steering team. Remember, the teams are bottom up, so contact the team leader. Everybody's welcome. You will need to get permission from your supervisor and possibly your supervisor's supervisor, so that's up to you to do that, but we will welcome anybody who is interested. Show an expertise. I can guarantee the teams will put you to work. As far as communications, there's the website. The teams have at least monthly teleconferences. We are starting in I think November, some face-to-face meetings, and I think that's going to be important to be able to have some of these face-to-face meetings in order to make sure that we don't lose sight of what we're doing. My experience has been you get a lot more done when you talk to somebody in a meeting than you do on a teleconference. Just because there are 13 teams now, that does not mean that's where we stop. New teams can be proposed. One has been proposed, and teams dealing with updates. So again, if you are interested in proposing a new team, you can talk to myself, talk to the steering committee as far as what's needed, but we'll be happy to entertain any ideas. Again, there's no set number, there's no set lifespan for a team. The only thing that we are really asking is that the teams show results, and that's the critical part of being on these teams, and a critical part of the focus teams is results driven. So with that, I'm going to stop. If anybody has some questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
All right, thank you, Dave. And while we give people an opportunity to compose their questions and enter those in the Q&A pod, I'll invite the people in the room here with me to, if you have any questions. All right, Dave, well, I'll ask a question, and hopefully it'll give people a chance to write their question and compose it for you. So you mentioned these teams, membership on the teams is voluntary.
Mm-hmm.
Is participation in the team something that would be reflected in somebody's performance plan, where, you know, like a SEPM for civil rights would be?
I would hope so. Again, I'm not the supervisor for most of the folks out there, but I would certainly hope that working with your supervisor and putting it in a performance plan so you get credit for it. Yes, I would hope so.
All right, we have a written question here. Has there been any interest in a LIDAR focus team?
As I understand it, anything working with LIDAR would probably be working with the digital mapping team, the DSM team, as well as working with the initial team. So it looks like, Martin, if you're interested in that, I'd talk to those folks first, and then we can go from there.
All right, any other questions? All right,
Good,
well, looks
totally clear. I love it.
Hi folks, this is Dave Hoover, Director of the National Soil Survey Center. I'm going to be talking a little bit about working with the National Soil Survey Center. So just a brief overview. I'm sure a lot of you have worked with folks here, have talked with folks here, but we've made some changes over the years, so I just want to do a very brief overview of who our folks are. So we have several branches, boxes, divisions. I don't know that we've come up with a good name for what they are, but we have the Soil Survey Standards branch. It's led by Curtis Monger. These are the folks that are in charge of the handbooks, the field books, taxonomy, the editorial staff, and training. We have the Research and Laboratory branch, which is led by Doug Wysocki, which is the soils-based research soil scientist that we have, and also the Kellogg Soils Laboratory. We have the Soil Business Systems branch, which is our current acting leader is Curtis Monger. We do have a vacancy announcement that closed, and we hope to have somebody selected and on duty by the end of the year. These are also the folks that deal with data collection, which is like our field data collection tools, the LIMS laboratory database, Nasus soils database, and others, and the information delivery services that we have through Web Soil Survey, Soil Data Access, and some of the web map feature services. We have the Soil Interpretations branch, which is led by Maxine Levin, and this is using the soils data to inform current land use decisions as to soil suitability and limitations. And we have the Ecological Sites branch, which is led by Joel Brown. The primary focus on this is the development of ecological site descriptions for all lands in the U.S. We also maintain a close affiliation with two national leader positions out of Washington, D.C. This is the Technical Soil Services branch, which is led by our host, Mike Robotham. This is basically the outreach branch with extensions to the states, the public, and to agency programs. And the World Soil Resources Program, which is currently led by Mike Robotham, which is global outreach, education, training, collaboration with other countries, things like that. I want to go into a few of the individual services that the various branches provide. And just for your interest, the pictures that you'll see on the slides are the Nebraska Sandhills, part of the country that I spend a lot of time in and like. So you get to see a little bit of my Nebraska Sandhills. So the lab is able to provide assistance on lab sampling, how to do that out in the field, lab data analysis. Once you get all the results from all of the lab samples and all the analyses run, what sense can we make of it? What does it tell us? and also assistance in customized lab report assistance. So if you're, we have the standard types of lab reports that we have for all processes, but sometimes people want that combined in new ways or want to look at things that might not be on that report that we can assist with. The research branch can assist with development of research projects, sampling schemes, setting research objectives, things like that, and can also help with special field studies such as saturated hydraulic conductivity or other types of field investigations. The standards branch are those folks that keep us up to date on all of our handbooks and manuals. These are our policy and our procedures documents. They also help make sure that our materials get into the e-directive system, which are really the place for storing all of the authoritative versions of our information. The standards branch has also taken on a big project on updating Ag Handbook 296, which is the major land resource areas. This has basically been a three-phase operation. One, it's soliciting information from all parts of the country on where revisions need to take place. The next phase will be in gathering the exact information, such as line movements, wording changes, things like that. And the third phase will be incorporating it all into a new national document, all with appropriate phases of input, review, and transparency. Taxonomy is able to work with folks on the review of proposals for changes to soil taxonomy, and also the right way to write those proposals so that they can be reviewed by a larger audience. It does maintain a discussion site on the Soil Taxonomy Forum. We'll be conducting taxonomy workshops on subaqueous and urban taxonomic issues, and also has worked with the Soil Taxonomy Focus Team. You just heard Dave Lindbo talk about the focus teams. The next very involved slide is just one to bring out that oftentimes we get suggestions for changes to the National Soil Survey Handbook, the National Ecological Site Handbook, other types of documents, and folks will bring up very good points, and we agree with them, but we have a process to go through in order to make sure that these are properly written, codified, published, and it's not a quick process, but it's a thorough process, and if we don't get this done, it doesn't wind up in e-directives, which I just mentioned was the site. So this isn't a process that we get a good idea one day and 2 days later we just make a pen and ink change in our National Soil Survey Handbook. Instead, it's an involved process, but it's very thorough. I'm going to move to my next slide because there's going to be no test on this slide, but there's a lot of information, and I just want to impress upon folks that we do follow an established process, and it does take a little time. So speaking of established processes, the days of walking down the hall to talk to somebody who's in charge or giving someone a call are drawing to a close. Now we're in a world of group email and drop boxes. All I can say is get used to it, even in soils. One of the saving graces we have is the Soils Hotline. The Soils Hotline has an unprecedented, in government at least, history of response times. Questions are often answered in one day, and the team has a large reference base and frequently receives input from professionals at the center to assist users in Nasus, web soil surveys, soil data access, use of soils data, and general and sometimes specific and complicated questions about soils information. So it's just one of those facts that the best way to get in touch with a decreased staff is often by email. It keeps that record. It's a good way to get in touch with folks. I've also thrown my email up on this slide. I'm a good way to get in touch with folks too. So if there are questions, I'm certainly open to that, and I do the same type of thing by kind of triaging out questions. We do provide quite a bit of editorial assistance. We have 3 editors on staff, requests for assistance, information, word usage, document organization, writing, editorial type questions can go directly to those 3 editors with a CC to Curtis Monger, please. As far as training goes, we've always had a strong training program. We need to have training identified in AgLearn. This is a new agency push. There can be changes to the curriculum that we have in our training classes. These need to go to Sean McVeigh and to the training focus team. There is going to be a meeting in December on overall training that is provided. There's also a recognized need for entry-level training. We are hoping to build up the number of entry soil scientists that we have, and that requires training, more so than a lot of universities do provide. We also want to point out that we have numerous online modules and training modules, on-the-job training modules, and YouTube videos. And also, I believe a notice just went out this last week or this week, Sean's nodding one of those, that the Soil Geomorphic Institute is still being held. It'll be held in Las Cruces in 2018. Nasus is something that we all discuss and cuss, but it is our corporate data model. Changes to Nasus can happen. New elements can be added, new definitions can be made, new validations can be looked at, but they go through, of course, a process, and they need to be identified through the Soil Business System staff for changes that need to occur in Nasus. There's also a new chapter in the Nasus guide, chapter 26, on forms development, which is the ability to create our own data entry or data reporting type of forms, much like those of you that have worked in Access have a way to customize the way that you input or have data. So it's a nice way to do your own thing in Nasus in a world that's often regimented in that.
Okay. Okay. All right.
We need somebody to mute their microphone, please. We also have assistance that we can provide not only to folks in the Soil Science Division, but folks in the states, again, mostly on software type issues, soils types issues, and that's the certification. There's quite a process that we go through in order to certify new software for use. It can be done on individual computers. It can be done for a whole group. I also want to talk about the annual refresh. This is something that's happening annually. Quite a bit of work can be done through the center on working with states and regions on getting the soils data refreshed. We still have the process for during the year if there are updates that need to be made to the authoritative data, such as finding some egregious type error, or having a new survey that just came out in January and you don't want to wait until the following October to get it released. Those things can still happen, and those types of exceptions are directed to the National Leader for Soil Business Systems. I will mention that there is a technical working group that has met once and is planned to meet again in another month or so on working just on that annual refresh process. The center too can help with work in LIMS. LIMS is the software that takes all of the data from all of the analytical machines in the lab and gets it to a common database, so that it can be exported in a different variety of formats online, and also it can be done in customized reports too. Much like the soil survey reports, it's got a lot of information. And if folks want it in a specific format, we can work with folks to help do that. We also can help with use of the Access database exports that come out of the repository of LIMS data. Soil data access is one new thing that the center has been involved with. This is the site. I think a lot more of you are using this site now. This is one that allows you to access the authoritative soils data, same data that gets put out in Web Soil Survey, but in an SQL format, and can be not only integrated within different types of software, which quite a few companies and organizations are doing around the nation, but can also be done just by any of us that want to write SQL, which is kind of a scary process in itself, is writing SQL. And I'm going to show a slide here in just a minute of a new utility that we've put up that hopefully has made that a little bit easier. We also provide support here at the Center for Web Soil Survey, which is, we still will always take information on identifying new reports that need to be out there. In fact, this last year there were new reports posted, 3 new soil health reports. So it can be done. It goes through quite a bit of vetting and discussion, but certainly new reports and all new changes or enhancements to Web Soil Survey are listened to. They're just not possible to get them all done, but they all get logged in. They get put into a big tracker out in Fort Collins, and everything gets looked at. So be sure and identify if there are things that you want to see new or different. I mentioned the Soil Data Access SQL Library. Here's a slide of what one page out of that looks like. There are hundreds of SQL examples on there. So this is, for instance, this is how I kind of learned how to do SQL. I knew what I wanted to query a database on, and I looked at what somebody else had written, and then I edited it. And I think this is still an effective way of finding out what you want to do. What it is, there's a whole bunch of functional areas, topic areas that the SQL library is broken into. This is an example if you wanted to run a report on dominant land capability by slope range. Interesting report. Here's your SQL. All you have to do would be to copy those 6 lines, paste it into the Soil Data Access query box, and you would get a report that looks pretty much like the one that's down below, for example, table output. The nice thing about this is if you want it slightly different, you can edit the SQL to make it, change it for a different states, change it for a different soil survey area. If you need help on how to write those blocks of code that sort and change things, there's also a whole section in the SQL library about common blocks of SQL that you might want to use. So this is certainly a way to beef up knowledge about SQL. We'll also mention that the National Soil Survey Center can help with partnership notifications. This is something that's been increasingly important. You know, we used to work with list servers where we had to maintain an email list of a couple hundred people, and somebody had changed their email, and we'd have to track down where are they at now and what's their new email. Just can't do that these days. So by going to Gov Delivery, we're now able to reach thousands of people very easily, and it's up to them to make sure if they maintain their subscriptions or not. So there are currently 12 topics in Gov Delivery. Most of them are somewhere in the range of having 10 to 15,000 subscriptions a piece, and the Technical References Gov Delivery site has over 46,000 subscribers to it. So this is a way not only to deliver information, but to deliver ideas and to get quick stuff out to a wide variety of people who are interested in it. We're also able to help with the development of new tools. These are mostly development through our own investment review board, and I've got a slide on that for how that process works. But before I go to that, I do want to mention that we still have a Soil Business Area Advisory Group that's mainly working on the field office computing environment, and that folks here at the center can also help with some forms of tool development. The next slide shows how investments go through the Investment Review Board and for funding by the agency. So whether it's a new idea or an addition to an existing piece of software or website or something that we already have, about anybody can propose that kind of stuff. They can get that into folks on the Soil Business Systems staff, say, here's kind of a cool idea. You know, what do you think about this? And it gets a little bit of a discussion. And then there's what's developed next is a document called a mission needs statement, where it says, well, what mission of the NRCS or of the Soil Science Division or of the Department of Agriculture does this new tool or addition to an existing tool meet? At that point, the IRB, the Investment Review Board, assigns a system architect to work with the group to develop what's called a high-level business requirement. And that high-level business requirement has enough in it so that somebody can take a look at it and say, well, we're going to need so many hours of a developer's time. We're going to need so many hours of a database person's time. We're going to need so many hours of a web designer's time. And they'll come up with an approximate cost, what it will take to fund that investment. Then it goes to the Investment Review Board, who controls all the money for investments in the agency. This is somewhere between $40 to $50 million out there. I will mention that at this time, the dominant investment of the agency is for the Conservation Delivery Streamlining Initiative, or CDSI. So if you've heard your field offices talk about this, this is going to be the new software conservation planning tools. A lot of the funding is going directly for this. But we still get some of our soil stuff done dominantly if it's things that also benefit those CDSI tools. Then it goes to ITC, to Fort Collins, for development. Now, I do have that arrow down at the bottom for maintenance, so these would be things that if it's just normal maintenance, if it's a bug that's found, if it's a new version of SQL Server or something, that just gets funded. It doesn't really have to go through the whole process. So, like with many other things, we have a process. I'll also mention real quickly that we are involved in working with, remember I said our partners in Technical Soil Services and World Soil Resources. There will be more on this on the next webinar, so there's a little hook for you to tune into the next one. On international activities, what we do to assist with that. We assist with state operations quite a bit, get a lot of calls from a lot of state soil scientists on things that we can assist with, and always are glad to do it. And we also work a lot with other divisions and deputy areas. The center is also involved with a lot of ecological activities, as I mentioned before, primarily in the assistance in ecological site development, assistance in using the new EDIT tool, which is the Ecosystem Dynamics interactive tool. Yes, thank you. Which will be coming out as the new way to enter and to receive ecological site information. And we work with folks on ecological site descriptions for conservation planning on all land uses. We also have a full interpretation section that works, as the name implies, on agronomic and soil properties, interpretations assistance for conservation planning. It also provides assistance for the use of soils data for SIRGO, GSIRGO, StatsGo, other forms of soils data for not only our own agency but for partners and for the public. And it's also providing training on 3 main interpretations training sessions, and that's understanding interpretations, the science of interpretations, and the development and design of interpretations. So everything you want to know about interpretations can be received out of those 3 classes. The last slide that I have just shows the different entities that we work with. It almost appears like I'm a little egocentric here, that we're the core of everything, but that's not what I was going for here. What I was going for here is that these are all of our communication lines that we use at the National Soil Survey Center. Only if all these communication lines are working does the whole objective of soils information, soils data delivery, natural resource planning, ecological investigations, does it work? So even though that there's a need to maintain a chain of communications, there's also a necessity that communication has to move in all levels and between all levels. And that's, I think, one of the major roles of the National Soil Survey Center is to help those communications happen. And with that, I think I'm done. That's the National Soil Survey Center assistance that we can provide in a glance.
All right, Dave, well, we'll open it up for questions online and both here in the room with us here. Dave, while we give people a chance to compose their question, I'll go ahead and ask you a question. So you talked about new tool development, and I think you were mostly targeting software tools, but can the center help with development of other tools for field mapping, whether it's an urban area, some gadget that's used to identify heavy metals or something like that in the soil, or a reusable split spoon kind of sampler, those kind of physical tools, you know what I mean?
Okay, so for instance, we have folks that are working with geophysical investigations, with the XRF systems, the other types of scanners, working with mid-infrared scanner technology. There's a test site down in Kansas right now, working with the folks at the state office up in North Dakota on that also. So yes, there are definitely looking at other tools that can be used out there and what other universities might be doing to look at those.
All right, so we got a question that's come in. If the technical working group on the refresh process part of a focus team, gotta make that a little smaller so I can read it.
I think it's how does one join? It's not one of the official focus teams. It's more one of those wanting to get it, the whole process put out as a national instruction. So it's the Soil Business Systems team, it's the Standards team, and it's the Interpretations team that are all working together on that. I'd say if somebody really wants to get more involved with that or find out more about what's going on, they could contact Mike Robotham.
Yeah, it's either this is Mike. What we're trying to do is we're trying to have kind of, I don't know if you want to call them layers of teams, but the technical the refresh process, that's a highly focused thing, and so we're trying to put together a small working group to deal with that and focus on that specific issue. As Dave mentioned, that issue touches a lot of other things, and so we need to sort of deal with it in the micro, but also in these larger frameworks. But if you are interested, please let me know or contact George Teachman at the center. But I think George may be out for a couple of weeks. I believe he's on leave, so probably better to contact me.
All right, we have some more questions in the Q&A. So can the center help with the Soil Web app to get it updated? We have partners asking about that tool.
You know, it's a great tool. It was certainly used. It was innovative when it came out. NRCS did assist with some initial funding on that one. I just got an email, I think it was today, on the Soil Web app and what's happening with it. So I plan on following up with whatever I can do to keep that tool going. I believe the email that I read also said that although the app may be in trouble for development and needing programming, that the website that allows for folks to go in and look at, tap their screen or go in and look at specific areas, that was still going to function. I also know that some of the developers on that one are looking at some new applications that they could try to duplicate some of the same functionality, but not having to go to an iOS or Android type system. So yes, I plan on as soon as I find a little time to examine that email a little bit more and see what's going on with Soil Web, because I think it should be continued. Something like that, the functionality of that needs to be supported.
Another question's come in. What's the future of the soil quality test kit?
Go ahead, Dave, and I'll take a stab at it as well.
I was going to turn that over to the guy sitting just across the table from me, Mike Kuchera, and maybe talk a
That'd be
little.
perfect. That's even better. So go for it, Mike.
Okay. First of all, the Gempler still has a soil quality test kit out there, which is the big crate, and so you can still actually order that or order parts of it. It gets rather spendy. And so what has happened with that is probably about 5 years ago, I worked with a small group, and we developed the concept of a soil quality bucket, which is basically can be customized to your own bucket list, if you will, to put together simple tools to assess chemical, physical, biological properties of soil and soil health assessments. And so that is all online, videos, and a whole array of information. And there's been probably at least 20 plus states that have developed their own buckets and customized them to their own needs. If you have specific questions, I'd be glad to answer those and help you with them. I've actually went out to quite a few states, and we've done in-field sessions where we've used states' buckets and customized them to those states' needs. So I just encourage you to contact us if you need additional assistance.
Great, thanks.
And just to follow up on what Mike said, in the larger issue of field assessments for soil quality and soil health, there's an ongoing cross-division working team that Mike has been involved with, a number of other people have been involved with, both from Soil Science Division, from Soil Health Division, and I believe some state folks as well, looking at what would be a minimum data set of field indicators. And because as you all are aware, there are a myriad of cards and different worksheets, tech notes out there in the states, and there is a project led by Dave Lamb from the Soil Health Division trying to consolidate that information, leading toward a national, I don't know if you want to quite call it a minimum data set, but so those discussions are underway. We're not trying to prevent states from doing what works for them, but also there's a benefit to having some things that are relatively consistent nationwide. So stay tuned for more information on that.
Yeah, and I would say
both the Soil Health and the Soil Science Division. So
yeah, I'd say there's two parts to that. One would be for in-field assistance where you may be working with a farmer or landowner, and then the second part would be things or assessment items that you could actually put in a database. And so actually we're looking at both of those.
Well, Mike, before I close things out, do you have any comments you want to say to wrap things up?
Only just to thank everyone again for tuning in. I see we had over 100 lines, so another great crowd today. I appreciate folks taking time out of their busy schedules to join us again this week. I hope you found the information useful. As always, when you think of that inevitable question an hour from now, that darn, I wish I would have asked that, please don't hesitate to either email me or to email Dave or Dave directly, and we'll make sure that your question gets answered. This is the second of a three-part series, so don't tune out just yet. Please join us again, same time, same place, next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Adjust for your time zone as appropriate. What the third part of this series will focus on is we'll focus on that area of technical soil services, and in particular issues related to requesting TSS, reporting, and basically how we can work better together as the entire soil science community and the agency, whoever your boss is, whether that's a state conservationist, an area conservationist, a soil survey regional director, or someone at national headquarters. We know soils information is extremely important to the mission of the agency. People have questions and they need good answers. And the more we can work together to make that happen, the better off we're all going to be. So we're going to talk about, that's going to be the focus of next week. For those of you on the line, you do get a sneak preview of a memo that's going to be going out very soon. For those of you who do report your technical soil services activities in Nasus, and thank you very much if you are part of that group, The deadline for reporting this year will be Halloween, October 31st, so cue the spooky music. If you have not reported activities from the last fiscal year because they're just sitting there on your calendar or for whatever other reason, you have, what is it? It is now the 12th, so you have 19 days to finish that up and get credit for your activities in our annual report. And I'll pound on that to desk pretty hard next week, but figured I'd give you folks a sneak preview since you're on the line. With that, I think I have permission from Sean to close us out. So thank you again for attending, and we hope to hear you all next week.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to Dave Lindbo and Dave Hoover for their time and effort to make the presentation. The on-demand recordings of this and previous webinars and next week's webinars will be posted to our National Soil Survey Center YouTube channel at the conclusion of our third part of this webinar series. And this concludes our webinar presentation.